Hello everyone, it's so good to be here yet again. It seems I'm making yet another video about video games, and this is one that I in particular have to talk about because the original Silent Hill 2 that came out back in 2001 on the PS2 is quite literally my favorite game of all time. In fact, it's so fundamental to me, it's pretty much the reason why I became a game developer in the first place. So yes, it's an incredibly important game, and whenever I hear any news about a remake of this game, of all games in particular, I approach it with great wariness and trepidation. But I admit I was quite intrigued when I learned that Bloober Team of all people were developing this game. And not that this is any import whatsoever, but it is always exciting to me to see Polish game developers working on a project. Because of the simple fact that I am Polish. Cześć, witam z Kanady. In any case, Bloober Team are responsible for making games like Layers of Fear and The Medium. And I always thought these were interesting games, even if they were quite rough around the edges, especially on a technical side. Frankly, on a personal level, I would much rather have a game with soul rather than just some cookie cutter AAA formula that is repeated ad nauseum. Whatever criticism you may levy to Bloober Team, I don't think you could accuse them of that. At least they were trying to do something a little new and different. But no matter, coming back to present days with the remake of Silent Hill 2, when I learned that they would be the ones remaking this game of all games, once again, one of the greatest games of all time, and in my particular case, my favorite, most important game, I wasn't sure that they had quite the technical chops to pull this off. So from the get-go, I was going to this project with a super critical eye, not only because of their perceived past skill set, but also, let's face it, last 20 years for the Silent Hill franchise at large has been a complete catastrophe, apart from PT of course, but even that was a tragic story in and of itself, because that masterpiece of a game experience that was fully done and just shipped out to the world was destroyed. But that is neither here nor there. I'm really gonna try and not open that rabbit hole. In any case, once again, coming back to present day with this Silent Hill 2 remake from Bloober Team, I'm kind of blown away by the level of quality of this project. This is a monumental upgrade from their past projects. I would not have dreamed that they'd be able to pull off this level of quality for Silent Hill 2. Frankly, I think they captured the essence of what makes Silent Hill feel like Silent Hill. Truly, they nailed the look and feel of the town, and the fog as well feels super appropriate. And also, the graphics are kind of amazing. This is low-key one of the best looking games of 2024. That is apart from some regular muddy textures every now and then that kind of sour the experience overall, but for the vast majority, this is a damn fine looking game. And maybe I'm the only one who thought this, but maybe James Sunderland has the most beautiful video game hands I've ever seen. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks this, but I'm sticking to my guns on that one. Putting the visual aspect aside for a second, which undeniably is an incredibly important and vital part of the experience, but one might argue that the auditory experience is even more fundamentally important to the Silent Hill experience. And I'm happy to report that the game has truly outstanding sound design. A lot of the sound and atmosphere that we know and love from the original game are back here, and the same can be said for the soundtrack, though there are some remixes. A little bit more on that later on. But all that to say is that the game sounds amazing. And speaking of things that are returning in this game, this is pretty much the same great story we know and love, though the narrative experience overall has remained unchanged for the most part. Most of the changes come from a level design point of view, which I think is a really smart way of approaching these kind of remakes. And it's something that the new Resident Evil games have been doing very, very well, so it is a trend that I honestly think is working to the benefit of making homages to these classic games. And for people like me who know the original game like the back of their hand, there's some really nice surprises that I found quite inspiring. And another element that comes back from the original, once again, another fundamental key pillar of Silent Hill, is the scare factor, and frankly, this game is terrifying. The kind of horror that Silent Hill taps into is something incredibly raw and unlike any other game you'll play out there. There's something about the horror of Silent Hill that leaves you feeling emotionally vulnerable to the psychological obstacles that this game will put you through. And then when I think about the progression and structure of the game itself, it's very much a downward spiral where it starts off relatively smooth. I mean, I guess depending on what your tolerance factor with horror is, but comparatively starts off relatively smooth. But the deeper you go in this game, the darker it gets. And when I say dark, I don't just mean like gruesome and monstrous in that sense. Well, that too, but when I say dark, I mean darkness itself, this all-consuming black abyss that just lets no light through. It truly is a horror experience unlike anything else out there. And for further additions that were brought into this remake of the game, there's clearly a larger focus on combat in this game, which I was a little worried about initially because Silent Hill games aren't necessarily about the action. In fact, in the original games, the monsters were more like psychological obstacles for the player and character. But I am happy to say that the combat is competently designed and there's a pretty compelling game loop built around it, so I do find that functionally it's quite engaging. However, I do feel that it focuses a little bit too much on it, especially in the later parts of the game. It feels like it's almost mandatory to go through these combat challenges at times, which once again, in comparison to the original, that wasn't so much the focus here. But another positive aspect of the combat in this game is that it's super stress inducing, especially when it comes to the mannequins. The redesign of these creatures in particular, I did not see this coming. What the hell? Oh my god. There are just so many panic inducing moments where I just go flailing with my stick and then just stomping them repeatedly, making sure that they're really dead this time. Christ almighty. And one further nuance on the combat itself, it seems like the boss battles in this game have also been significantly beefed up in their experience, and I do mean that in a good way. Of course, Pyramid Head, one of the iconic creatures of Silent Hill, is present in this game specifically. In fact, it really should be said that he only belongs in Silent Hill 2. That is something a lot of other Silent Hill games and films totally did not understand, but I digress. Pyramid Head is back and he's scarier than ever, and then all the accurate and amusing comment I saw on the internet was that in the original game, Pyramid Head felt like he was hitting the booze, whereas in this remake, it felt like he was hitting the gym. Holy shit, does Pyramid Head go hard in this one. Though I don't really want to go into spoilers if by chance someone hasn't played this game, but there is one boss in particular, the Abstract Daddy, which feels quite different from the original version. I mean, granted, in the original version, it tapped into something genuinely dark and disturbing, and there are elements of that in this version, though I will say it does feel a lot more like a Layers of Fear kind of level, and it's not terrible by any means, but I do feel like it kind of lacks that really personal and emotional nuance that the original game captured. And finally, in terms of the additions to this remake, I'm quite surprised by some really interesting reimagining of the puzzles in this game. One of the great new additions in this game that made the experience feel new and fresh while still familiar in many ways, and also features some pretty clever puzzle design. Did not expect that and was very pleasantly surprised. Now, if I had to be a bit more critical about the game, I did mention that past Blu-ray games had some technical issues. Now, it's not quite as bad as in those games, granted, which is a blessing, but I was a little disappointed, not because these were particularly earth-shattering issues, but more than anything, I was frustrated by the fact that these were constantly recurring issues throughout the whole game. So as a first comment, the camera is regularly janky in this game. You often, if not always, find yourself in these tight spaces and corners, either walking through doorways or climbing through a window, and the camera setup regularly just has issues dealing with these spaces. So it's a little annoying seeing that this is pretty much a global issue from A to Z in this game. And the second main point of frustration for me is the interaction zones. So you have these little circles that pop up on screen, and oftentimes I'm just struggling in my life to just find the perfect character body position and camera angle position to get that sweet spot where I can finally pick up a health item, pick up ammo, or even save the game. Once again, these issues aren't necessarily going to destroy the game, but they were a regular frustration. However, my biggest gripe with this game is in regards to the voice acting. Not to say that the voice actors are terrible at their job or anything like that, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And this is also a feature of me being so intimately connected with the original Silent Hill 2, because there's something about the voice acting and the delivery of the narrative in that original game where they just captured this perfect minute nuance in the performances. The original developers truly just captured lightning in a bottle, and I think it's kind of impossible to recreate the same circumstances where those performances just yielded those kind of beautiful results. I think if I look at characters like Angela and Eddie, they're the ones that suffered the worst from this. Once again, not hating on the voice actors, but when I look at that first scene where we first meet Angela in the original game, just the way she says the word lost.
I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
That one word was delivered with such power, and it really just raises a question mark on the state of the characters. Whereas in this remake version, I find that they bulldoze over all these nuances time and again. So that is something that rubbed me the wrong way pretty much the whole way through. I'm nitpicking, I know, but I just gotta be honest about it. However, I will say that the voice actress who plays Mary absolutely knocked it out the park. For the most part, there's still a few scenes which, once again, I find that they don't quite capture the same nuance we had in the original game, but she is by far my favorite voice acting talent of the game. And also, in terms of the animation, I do find that some of the character expressions are a little wooden. I don't know if I'm the only one who feels this way, but once again, comparing to the original ones, there's this element about the emotion they captured that just isn't quite there for me. And much the same can be said about the music as well. I did mention that a lot of the original songs do come back in this version. Yes, that is true, but there are also a lot of remixed songs. And once again, I find that it doesn't quite achieve the same level of quality or that emotional nuance that the original captured. And even when the original songs were just untouched, the context of where they would be playing and also the timing of when they would play in that event was also altered. So it is something that kind of impacted my experience. But once again, this is coming from someone who knows the original a little bit too well for their own good, especially when it comes to playing a remake. So take that for what you will, but I do want to reiterate the fact that just speaking about the soundtrack itself, the original Silent Hill 2 soundtrack is literally one of the greatest soundtracks of any video game ever, even to this date. So as for my final thoughts about this, even though I find that it pales in comparison to the original, for the record, if I had to score the original Silent Hill 2 on the PS2, that game is an 11 out of 10. Yes, I do genuinely believe it is that good, even today with the comparatively dated graphics and controls. But even so, this is a surprisingly stellar remake. Whatever expectations I had for Bloober Team making this version of Silent Hill 2, they wildly exceeded my expectations. Hot damn. Dziękujemy wszystkich was, że wyście nie spierdzielili naszą ulubioną grę. Naprawdę bez żartów, serdecznie dziękujemy. And putting aside the fact that all these new changes to the puzzles, the unquestionable graphical update over here, as well as all the gameplay improvements are very much well appreciated, just inherently the game Silent Hill 2, the experience of Silent Hill 2 is just so inherently incredible. And as dark and terrifying as a horror experience this is, there's something genuinely hauntingly beautiful about the story, which does sound like a great contradiction, but it is what gives this game its legendary status and power. So as far as this remake goes, I'm ranging from an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10. Even though I still feel today that original game is still superior in many ways, and it will always be in my heart, this is a pretty amazing way to play this classic game. So this is an easy recommendation. So with all that being said, wishing you and your loved ones nothing but the best. Take care and talk to you soon.